Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Reels with Liberty Utilities. I'm joined by Rob McLean from Liberty Utilities, Pelham resident, and Ted, and I'm pausing on your last name, Ted Stiles from Yankee Thermal. Paray, okay. And Ted has a slide presentation that explain the home performance with Energy Star program and electric usage in your home, and how the utility, through your system benefit charge you pay on your electric bill every month, collects $1 million a year, and then as directed by the Public Utilities Commission, we provide programs to qualified customers to help you reduce your electric bill and your oil bill and your propane bill and your wood bill, whatever you have. So Ted will go into the details, but before we get started, I wanted to thank Kayla for organizing the event, and the town of Pelham for letting us come. We do have some flyers over here, and everybody please sign in and feel free to take a pen. Some of these flyers talk about customers that have taken advantage of our programs. If you know of any business that has oil or propane, this is a special program we're running right now that I coordinate, provides rebates for people putting high performance propane and oil heating systems. So please take one of those to them if you would. We can provide rebates to the oil propane commercial customers, in addition to up to 35% on weatherizing their business. So this is existing customers or new customers. And of course we have our LED coupons and other programs. Any questions before Ted gets started? Rob will be around to help with the questions at the end. Thank you again for coming.
All right, thanks. All right, well, thanks for having me. If you've never been, I'm assuming most of you guys have been here before, but if you've never been here before, I understand the bathrooms are out that hallway and down to the left, and also right on the left there. We have some snacks there, pizza, water, sodas, it looks like. As Bob mentioned, as I have up there, please sign in over there, because we would like to send you an electronic copy of the presentation tonight, and that would be a good way for us to kind of keep in touch if you have questions or things like that. So again, my name's Ted Stiles, and these are some of the people who have sort of contributed to this presentation. This has been going on for a few years now, this button-up presentation, and they go on all throughout the state of New Hampshire. There's several different people that are putting these presentations on, and I'm just one of them, so I'm happy to be here tonight. I appreciate everyone following the rules, not like these. I was a teacher for 20 years, so I really appreciated this slide, because every time I do something, I expect it's going to go like this, and it almost never does. So this is called Button Up New Hampshire. Basically, we're just going to be talking about some real basic stuff. Some stuff's going to be a little bit more involved. I'm sure not everyone will be completely happy, because you can never please everybody, I've learned in life. So we'll sort of shoot down the middle and hope that we kind of catch most people, answer most people's questions. Thank you for coming tonight too. This is a study that I ran into recently. It says basically that Americans are too cheap and lazy to really save on energy. Why? Because energy efficiency improvements always involve research, effort, and out-of-pocket expenses. And it's really easy just to imagine yourself, yeah, I'm going to turn the lights off, I'm going to take short showers. Like, people tell themselves stuff like that all the time. And I'm not saying that stuff's not worthwhile. It does work, but to really save a lot of energy, it takes some energy and effort. So you had to get here tonight and learn some things. So you're kind of proof that really isn't true. That I think that really Americans aren't really that out of it. And of course, we all know why we're here, because this is right around the corner, right? Hopefully not like Halloween or something it was a couple of years ago, but hopefully it will last a little longer. But pretty soon, this is what our world will look like. That's usually most people's, overwhelming desire to look into their energy use. Another reason is, the volatility of the energy markets, right? This is the price of oil from 1970 up until a few years ago. I mean, it's crazy the way things are going, right? So you never really know. Is it going to be cheap this year? Is it going to be expensive this year? And that's a hard thing to deal with. And this is all tied into global climate change, and it's tied into CO2 reduction. One of the questions that a lot of people have sometimes is like, well, why does Eversource, the electric company, care how much propane I use? What interest do they have in that? And it's because it all comes down to CO2 production and CO2 reduction. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how that all ties together, you know. And most of us know a lot of this kind of thing about the global climate change issues and things like that, and CO2. So that's really the big picture. Plan for tonight, we're going to go through some electric stuff, reducing electric costs in your home. Then we're going to go through heat loss and reducing your heating costs, which could be electric too if you have electric heat. We'll go through some health and safety concerns because I'm hoping that you're going to get some ideas and maybe bring them home and you might try some of the stuff yourself. But you have to be careful. You know, there are some ways of messing things up and getting hurt. So we don't want that to happen. And we'll talk about working with professionals, energy auditors like myself, and working through the Home Performance with Energy Star program that Bob mentioned, the rebate program. I'll tell you a little bit of information about that. If you have any questions, please write them down for now. There's a pad over there and there's pens. So just write them down, unless it's really urgent and you just can't wait. You have to ask it. But what I find usually is that we'll just get way too bogged down if people ask too many questions. Because chances are I'm going to answer your question anyway. It's just going to be, light down the road. And we'll have time at the end for questions too. So we'll start with the obvious things. Turn stuff off, right? I mean, this sounds stupid, but I'm amazed when I'm doing an energy audit in a house. I'm in someone's house for 3 hours walking around, and there's 3 or 4 TVs on. There's only one person home, and the person hasn't left the one room they're in, and they're not even in the room with the TVs. And there's lights on everywhere and everything. And these people are paying me to come to their house to help them save energy. So it puts you in a little bit of a weird position sometimes. You want to just say, well, here, I found the first thing you should do, right? There's also a lot of things in people's houses they don't realize that are still on even though they hit the off button. Hitting the off button is not enough. There's a lot of anything that has a black box or a charger or a little tiny light or a clock or something like that, or a remote control. Those things still are drawing power even when they are not on. In fact, there are some of them that will actually use more electricity. Let's say it's a TV. There's some TVs that will use more electricity in the 23 hours that you're not using it than it does in the 1 hour you watch the news. That sounds crazy, but that's our world today. That's the way a lot of these products are made, unfortunately. So those are kind of obvious. Electricity, one of the big appliances in your house is the refrigerator. Anyone know why that is one of the most important ones to talk about with energy efficiency? What's special about a refrigerator? Anybody?
Most electricity.
How come?
Because it runs all the time.
Yeah, free LED light bulb for that gentleman right there. He got the answer right. Yeah, I mean, people use a dryer and they use a washer and stuff, but you use the TV, but you don't watch TV 24 hours a day. But the refrigerator's on all the time. It's the only thing in your house really that's on all the time. So if you're going to do one appliance and spend some money and get an Energy Star appliance, make it a refrigerator. If you're using water to heat if you're using electricity to use your hot water, you can lower the hot water temperature. A lot of people have it way too high. You can insulate the first 6 feet of the pipes because that is bleeding heat all the time. You can use a low flow shower head. That's going to cut down on your hot water usage. Some people are really hesitant to put those in because they think they're going to be like showering under a trickle. It's not it at all. In fact, sometimes you get more water pressure with a low flow shower head than you do with a regular one. So they're not that expensive. Try it out. If you don't like it, you can always take it off. But that's what I tell customers when I put them in. I'm like, I'm going to put it in. I'll come back next week if you say you hate it. And no one has ever called me back and said that they didn't like it. If you have an old electric tank, probably not insulated that well. The new ones are much more insulated. So that might be something to look into also. Anybody know what's wrong with that picture on the top on the right? We'll see how smart everybody is tonight. There's a really big error in that picture. See if you can figure it out. Yeah, you don't count. Yeah, it's a gas water heater. I just couldn't find a picture of an electric water heater, but so you see the gas line coming in. So that's not going to save much electricity, turning down the gas. And at the bottom here, this smiling gentleman is out there, hanging up his clothes to dry. It's old-fashioned, but it works. As long as you're not in one of those towns or condos that bans it. I know that that's an issue in some places. A lot of people have dehumidifiers in their basement. A lot of people have really old dehumidifiers in their basement. And I just ran into this just a week ago. They just did a study recently, and they found that the average dehumidifier uses twice as much electricity as an Energy Star refrigerator. And it can equal 9% of your total electric use in your home. It could even be more, but that was kind of the average in this study that they did. So that's a pretty big chunk out of the electric bill. Most people stay up after it gets dark, so we're using lights, or they're getting up before it gets light in the morning. LED lighting, cannot say enough good things about it these days. The bulb that I just handed out there is only costs about $5. That's why I gave it to you, because it's real cheap. I'm just kidding. They give the equivalent of a 60-watt bulb, and it only uses 9 watts. So it's tremendous savings there, They're not the old CFLs. I wish we never kind of did CFLs, because a lot of people that I work with, when I'm putting in LEDs, they think I'm putting in, no, trust me, this is going to come on instantly. You don't have to wait for it to warm up. It's not going to flicker, and it doesn't have any mercury in it, so if it breaks, you don't have to worry about, cleaning it up and taking special care. There's really nothing not to like about an LED. The only thing you need to be careful of, though, is that I would look for the 2700 to 3000 K or Kelvin when you go to the store. There's tons of them. If you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or something, you do not want to get one that's like 5,000 or 6,000 K. In fact, they call it daylight. Doesn't that sound wonderful? I want daylight in my house. If you get the one that says daylight, you're going to be really disappointed because you're going to feel like you're in a doctor's office or a biology lab. It's that blue, really nasty hue that makes you kind of want to take it out, unscrew it quick, right? Make sure you're getting one that is right for the receptacle you're putting it into. If it's dimmable or not, there is a difference in price and how they work. And one of the greatest things about them is some of them will last up to 30,000 hours. That's many, many hours and many years. Like the bulb will probably still be here when I'm not. Some of the really cheap ones I've noticed recently, part of the way that they've gotten them so cheap is they've cut down on the life expectancy. They kind of slipped that in there. So if you look, some of them are only like 5,000 or 10,000 hours. So you're like, oh, this is a great deal on an LED bulb. Then you look, you're like, oh, but it only lasts 5,000 or 10,000 hours. The one next to it is a little bit more, but it's going to last 30,000 hours. So another thing you can think about is task lighting, which is basically using a light for what you're doing. If you're sitting on your couch reading a magazine, you don't need 10 recessed lights 30 feet up on your cathedral ceiling. You just need one light over your shoulder, Or if you're ironing or something, you don't need all the lights on in the room to iron, right? So that's using a light just for what you need it for. A lot of the new switches have motion sensors and things like that. So if you forget to turn it off, they'll take care of it for you. If you have kids, that's a great one. If your son leaves the lights on in the game room after he's done playing video games, and there's 10 100-watt R30 lights on overnight, So that can be helpful for electricity. If you really want to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of electric use in your house, every library in New Hampshire has one of those white things at the top. It's called a kilowatt meter. So you can check that out like a book, and you can plug something into it, and it'll tell you how many watts it's using. And that can be really helpful. You have to do a little bit of math. You got to do some multiplication. If you want to get really into it like I do, I have one of these things in my house. It's called a TED meter, and it tells you this is how much electricity you're using right now. This is how much it's going to cost you by the end of the day if you keep doing this. By the end of the month, it's going to cost you this much. It can be really helpful to kind of know, It drove my wife a little crazy, though, because my kids came home when they were about 10. And they came home from school, and they dropped their backpack. And they looked at it, they're like, Mom, what have you been doing? You used 26 kilowatts of electricity already today. And she's like, oh, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to unplug that thing. And she's like, well, I did the wash, 2 loads. I vacuumed your room. I listened to some music while I did all that, and I straightened my hair, So you can kind of get a little crazy with this stuff, chasing down every little last kilowatt, and it kind of can become a little addicting, but, it's all good. If you're looking for appliances, there are different rebates out there for, like I said, refrigerators and air conditioning, even air purifiers. They range from $10 to $30. A lot of times they're like mail-in rebates, that kind of thing. Not sure if this is accurate anymore, but I think the refrigerator thing, they used to have a free pickup of your old refrigerator when they were delivering a new. He's shaking his head, yeah. And then they would, yeah. So you can go to that website, and that can give you a lot of information about that type of thing. You find out all different rebates for appliances. I'm not saying that you should go huck all your appliances and go buy Energy Star stuff. But if it's getting old and you're thinking about a new one, or it might be good now to do the research so that when it does kick the bucket, you're ready and you know what you want. All right, now let's get into what I kind of really like, which is heat loss and how to save money on heat loss. Because this is how we use heat, or how we use energy in our homes in New Hampshire, right? So the air conditioning is, sorry, this graph got a little messed up, but the refrigerator's here, air conditioning, all your appliances are in here, your water heating, but the big thing here is space heating. I don't mean like space like Star Trek, ooh, outer space. I mean the space in your house. Keeping that space warm is what uses most of the energy in our houses in New Hampshire, right? And we all know why, because we live in a cold area. We have a really long heating season. So we're kind of talking about this over here for the most part, but this is the hottest summer on record here in New Hampshire too. A lot of people were cranking their air conditioners. So if you do work in a house to keep the heat in the wintertime, it's also going to help you keep the heat out in the summertime. And if you have air conditioning, you're going to save a lot of money that way. If you don't, you're just going to be more comfortable. So it's important to think about it both ways, even though people oftentimes just are focused on winter, just kind of a little diagram of what I was just saying. Like in the wintertime, we're trying to keep all this heat in here. It's always going to be going out a little bit. We just want to reduce as much as we can. And in the summertime, you got a lot of heat out here. We don't want it to come in. So you can pretty much do the same thing. Some of these slides I'm going to kind of fly through because there are some extra ones and stuff. But so here's the big question, right? How can we use less energy in to heat our homes and still stay warm and comfortable? And that last part is important, because if the question was, how can we use less energy to heat our homes, what's the obvious answer? Do what she's doing. Lower the thermostat. Put a hat on. Wear gloves. Wear socks. But who wants to live that way, right? I've been in homes where the little kids running around with hat and gloves on, and just I can't do my homework. The iPad doesn't work with gloves on, touchscreen doesn't work. Nobody really wants to live that way. We want to kind of have our cake and eat it too. We want to live in a comfortable house, but we also don't want to spend an arm and a leg staying warm. The good news is you can do it. Here's a couple. Again, we're getting into start with some real basic stuff, just really low-hanging fruit, low-cost options. Number one, use the sun. You can open up the shades on the sunny side of the house. When the sun's out, let that sun in. It's going to help heat up your house. If you're going out of a room, or if you're going out of your house for 8 hours, turn the heat down. We can get into a whole discussion. A lot of times people ask a question about that, like, I know it has to warm back up when I come home, so isn't it using the same amount? And just trust me on that. It will save you energy. Programmable thermostats are a great thing for people who forget to turn their heat down. Like you get to work, like, oh, I forgot to turn the heat down. Now it's going to be up all day for 8 hours while I'm here. If you had a programmable thermostat, it would take care of that for you. Or when you go to bed, you're lying in bed and you're thinking, oh, I forgot to turn the heat down, but I really don't want to get out of bed, so you just leave it on. Some of them you can even, like this one down here, they have, I'm not a huge fan of these. They're pretty expensive. It's like $250 just so you can play with it on your smartphone while you're at work. I don't know. To me, it doesn't seem like it's worth it, but some people are really into that kind of thing. So if that'll get you to do it, then sure, why not? A lot of people leave their window ACs in way too long, or sometimes they leave them in all winter. That's not really smart. We're going to find drafts and seal them up. We'll talk a lot more about that in a little bit. Close the storm windows. A lot of times I'm in a house in January, and the storm windows are there, but they're not down. So they're not doing anything if they're not down. I don't know if they just forgot, or they don't think it makes a difference, or what. And you can use these threshold snakes, or I guess I should say dogs for this little one here. This one's a little dog, but those are like little low-tech things that you can use that will, they'll make you more comfortable and they'll save you some money. A little bit of basic science that you kind of have to know to sort of understand this stuff. Does anyone know what this, I do a program with the ninth graders at my local school too, so some of these slides are sort of aimed at that, but anyone know what goes in those two blanks there? Heat always moves from blank to blank. Anybody know? What's that? From warm to cold? Yeah, good. Yep. Yeah, pretty much anywhere on Earth, that's kind of how it happens. It's basic laws of physics. It's not up, down, left, right, it's hot to cold. And in our homes, heat travels in two primary ways. This is a really tough one. Anyone know how it kind of technical term. You might have to think back to your high school lessons. Too far back. Come on, it's only a couple of years. It was conduction, convection, and radiation, basically. Those are the three ways, right? Now, we don't live in Phoenix or anything, so let's not worry about radiation too much. But conduction is heat going through a solid surface like this red-hot cow poker here. The person's got a glove on because he knows it's going to get hot. And then this person's trying to warm up their hands because they know that the heat from this is going to warm up the air is going to come up, it's going to touch their hands. Hey, they're nice and warm, And this person over here, well, no, he's not an idiot because he doesn't have his hands over the fire, because he actually still will feel some heat from the fire, even though he's not above it. But it's a different kind of heat, so we're not going to really focus on that too much. But it's good to know that kind of stuff. This is one way of thinking about it. What happens if you came and sat on that park bench? Someone tell me what would happen. Like, just in layman's terms, what happens when you sit up? You feel cold, all right? All right, so you get up and you walk away, and then what's happened? What's going on now? Are you still feeling cold? You're feeling a little wet probably, a little cold, yeah. And you look back and there's like a big spot that's missing, right? So did you bring some cold with you from the bench?
No, you probably left heat.
No, you left the heat. Remember, because like he said, heat always goes from hot to cold, so you left heat behind. And this really grosses the students out when I say it in the high school, but I'm like, you ever sat down on a chair in the cafeteria if you had like second period lunch and someone else sat on it before you and it's warm? They're like, oh, I'm like you're not going to get sick from that. It's an invisible energy that they left. As long as it's dry and everything, like there's nothing there. It's just energy, but And then here's the other one, so when you put ice into a soda, why are you doing that? Well, you're trying to cool down the soda, right? Well, you are, but what you're really doing is you're drawing the heat out of the soda and you're making the ice warm, which is the same thing, but it's the flip side of the same coin. You know what I mean? So it's helpful to kind of look at it in those terms. And when it comes to a house, I'm going to show this slide again near the end, and this is a really important one. This is kind of like the ideal house, the ideal thermal boundary, right? You kind of need to have two things. You have to have some insulation, right? Well, my thing stopped here. You have to have insulation because that's going to stop the heat flow through the solid object, the walls, the ceiling, all that kind of stuff. But you also have to have an air barrier to keep the convection or the air from moving. If you have one, that's good, but it's not great. If you have the other, that's good, but it's not great either. You kind of need to have both. And unfortunately, most houses today don't have enough of both of these, or they have one or two or three places where one or two of those things is missing. Either the air barrier is missing or the insulation barrier. That's kind of how it works. So that's kind of like the ideal house. So we're talking about conductive heat loss. We're talking about keeping the heat in from going through solid stuff. Basically the way we measure it is R value. If you're not familiar with that term, it's basically how much does a material resist heat flow, right? And the higher the R value, the better it is at resisting heat flow. Lots of different, materials that are used for insulating and everything. Each one has its own little R value per inch. Everything has an R value. Wood, plastic. Luckily I don't have to memorize this stuff when I'm working because I have a little chart I could just look at it. But we're just going to flip through these quickly because we're not using that. So people ask, well, how much do I need? It kind of depends on where you live and what you're talking about, right? So we're up here. New Hampshire's kind of in an interesting, this is when I do it with the students, I go like this. Well, New Hampshire's here in an interesting position. And I see if anyone's like, hey, wait a minute, that's not New Hampshire, Sometimes they don't even catch it. But New Hampshire's up here, and we're kind of split between the two different regions, But we have, you have attic, ceiling, cavity, wall, floor. So you kind of have to look at the charts to kind of figure out, and this is according to the DOE, which is a great resource, but not everyone agrees with that. And the question is like, well, what type of insulation do I need, and where should it be? Should it be on the floor of my attic here, or should it be up on the slopes in my attic? The basement, should I do the ceiling of the basement? And unfortunately, we can't really get into that today because the answer is it kind of depends, So I'm going to give you some like basic theories and some ideas and stuff, but some of the questions we won't be able to answer, in your particular case. But the main thing is don't do stupid stuff. That's a famous phrase from another energy auditing guy. Like, to me, this is stupid stuff. I mean, do you think that insulation is doing anything there? It's just that there's a recessed light under there, so they actually built a cover over the recessed light and then just loops this fiberglass over there. I mean, that would be like going outside with just like throwing your coat over your head or something like that and walking. Like, it's not doing anything, you know? Or, this is interesting. I just took this picture last week. That looks pretty good though, doesn't it? Lots of insulation in that. But there's something wrong here. Anyone have an idea what it might be? The hint is that you can't really see it. Well, that's a good point. Yeah, why is the back wall insulated if the floor is insulated? That seems kind of silly. You do one or the other, but...
The attic's not, though.
Yeah, the slopes aren't, right. So it's a little bit of a confused area. It's like, well, what are you trying to do here? But the main thing is that underneath this fiberglass is wood, and underneath that wood is a gap of about 10 or 12 inches. So that insulation was a complete waste of money. I mean, if we fill up, I'm hoping we're going to go back in a couple weeks and fill that gap up with cellulose. If we do that, then it's going to help. But the insulation has to be in contact with the surface of the ceiling for it to work. And I see this quite a bit, where people kind of come in and they have a good idea. Oh, this stuff says it's insulation. It says it's R30. Let's put it in the attic. And they buy a bunch of it. They put it out there. But if it's not touching the sheetrock in your ceiling, it's not really doing anything. So, when I first walked into this attic, I was like, oh, wow, this attic already has R30. So I guess, we can still want to add some. R50 is where we like to get it to. And then I looked and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. There's more to it than that, So looks can be a little deceiving. Anyone know why this is a big fail? She knows. Tell us. She's going to burn her hand. So she's got to switch the mitt or switch her hands. I don't know what the answer is, but yeah. She obviously didn't know anything about conductive heat loss because she's wearing an oven mitt on the handle. And there's no stove company in America that makes a stove with where the handle gets hot. I mean, you would be sued within like a week because people would go to get their cookies out and be like, I burnt my hands. That's not what's going to be hot. It's the tray or whatever she's getting out. That's going to be hot, She's also dangling her hair really close to the flame of the stove there too, which is another thing that someone picked up on one time. But this isn't always a good one. True or false, does heat rises? False? Oh, good. Anyone say true? True. We got some true, we got some falses. The actual technical answer is it's false. And you should know better because you already told me where heat goes. You said heat always goes to cold. Yeah. So it's kind of a little bit of a trick question because something that's hot can rise, and it will. So basically, convection is when you have heat moving, and it's moving because it has the ability to move. So it can also happen in water or liquid, right? So if you have some warm air and some air next to it that's not as warm, it is going to rise. But it's not the heat that's rising. It's the hot air that's rising, right? And it also has to have somewhere to go. So those are kind of the things that you have to have to happen. And they know that in stadiums, right? They know that all the heat for all these people is going to rise to the top, and then like the people up here will never make it to the end of the concert because it's going to be so hot up there. They're going to want to leave. So they put, big systems in to move the air around and everything, there's a pot of water on the stove. I like to use the example of jumping in a pond in the summertime. You jump in a pond in New Hampshire, the top is nice and warm, the bottom is cold. And that's because the warm water can move up and the cold water can move down. If it couldn't, then it wouldn't do that and it would all be the same temperature. So how does it apply to a house? This is kind of a cutaway view, schematic view of a house. It's called the stack effect. The stack effect is when you have a difference in temperature between the inside and the outside, and you have a difference in pressure also. And these arrows kind of represent the pressure that the air is putting on the house. And you can see that the arrows are different lengths, right? So the higher up in the house you go, the higher the pressure is, and the lower you go down, it also gets a little gray. So this is kind of like what's happening in your house from a physics point of view. And that's kind of what it looks like in real life, right? So again, we have two different color arrows here. You got the red arrows up here, because that's all the places, the holes in the recessed lighting around the chimney, the hatch, the bathroom vent fan, all these little places have little cracks and holes. And if you have warm air in your house, we already determined that warm air, if it can escape, it will escape. And once it goes out, it's going to pull in cold air down here through all the places down here where cold air can come into your house. So that's kind of how convection works in a house. And you can see there's a multitude of places where it can come in. And this isn't even all of them. I mean, there's tons of other places too. So these cold arrows represent cold air. What do you think happens to the cold air when it comes in your house? What do you do to it? You heat it, right? I mean, most people heat their houses in the winter, so it becomes really expensive air. It comes in for free, blue air, and then it turns into expensive air, and then it leaves you. One really good way of thinking about it is this. Air can only come into a house if other air has a way to get out of the house. So if you're in a really, really tight house, you can open up the door to let the dog out or something. You don't have to be like, oh, hurry, 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 you're letting all the cold air in. I mean, you're going to feel some cold, but you're not going to feel like this big inrush of cold air unless someone has a window open or something upstairs. Because the air can't come in. How could it come in? Unless the neighbors are calling 911 and they're saying, oh my gosh, the Joneses' house, it's swelling up like a big balloon. It's going to explode any second now. You better get over here quick. That never happens. But you have all these houses where cold air is getting injected in there. Well, there's only so much air that can fit in the house. So all that air is coming in, it's the same amount of air is going out the top. So the converse of that is, if air isn't leaving the house, well, then air isn't coming in. So think about that and apply that to your house, right? If you can keep the air from leaving, now you're not going to have to worry about the cold air coming in as much. You can look at it like a balloon, right? These people are up in a balloon. They have a huge hole in their balloon, but they're not panicked because that's the way it's supposed to be. The hole's at the bottom, right? Now, if somebody flew one of those new drones in and ripped a hole in the top, that's when you take your phone out and you do a selfie and you're like, oh, you Twitter about it and stuff, right? We're going to die now as we're going down. So yeah, the top of a balloon is very important. That's the most important part to keep intact. And it's the same thing in a house, right? So the priorities in your house, the top of the house is the most important, the attic. It's ABC. It's really easy to remember. I set it up that way for you. Attic, and then basement is the second, because remember, the bottom is where the cold air is coming in. And the center of the building, it's important, but it's not as important. Because if you go back, remember this slide here, there's actually a place in the middle of the house where you could have a hole and nothing would really happen to it. So those are the priorities. So when you're thinking about where to put your time or where to put your money or where to put your thought, and it's kind of counterintuitive because most people are thinking, oh, I need new windows or I need to do this in the center. The attic is really where you want to put your focus. So knowing what you know now, anyone tell me if they think this attic hatch is such a good idea? You know what that's made of? Can you tell? It's pegboard. The pegboard, the stuff you can put in your garage to hang your rakes and stuff up with? You think, bad idea, good idea? Bad idea, yeah. I made sure that I knew that the homeowner did not build this himself before I completely, put it down in front of him, because I've done that before and put my foot in my mouth and you look at it like, oh, who thought of this? Who did this? And the homeowner's like, oh, yeah, I did that. So no, this was a previous homeowner, but it had been there for 10 years. So for 10 years, all the warm air in the house was going up through these holes, I mean, it's not a huge hole, but that's a pretty significant hole. So what do? There's lots of different options out there. You have these commercial covers. You can weather strip. This is more like a hatch that we build in people's houses with rigid foam. This looks like a commercially made sort of similar thing. But the main idea, again, is going back to insulate it and seal it up so the air is not going out of it. When you get up in the attic, one of the biggest holes that I usually see in most people's houses is around the chimney. So here's a concrete block chimney with a big gap next to it. There's a brick chimney with a big, huge gap, and here's a metal flue pipe for a wood stove or something like that going down. You got to very carefully take a picture because if you drop your phone, it's going all the way down there. Right? Now, by fire code, there needs to be a little bit of a gap there. You don't want to have combustibles right up against the chimney, but it doesn't have to be wide open to the area below. So a lot of times what people have done, or maybe what a contractor has done, is they've taken fiberglass, pink, fluffy, fiberglass, and stuck it in the hole. And then I come along and pull it up and look at it. It looks like a cigarette butt. It's so nasty. Now, that's not smoke and stuff from the furnace. That's inside the chimney. That's house air that's going up there. Because even when on a really good day, there's still pollen and dust and everything in the air, right? So it's all collecting in that fiberglass. So for 22 years or something in this case, that thing's been filtering all the warm air in the house and accounting for a lot of the heat loss. So how do you fix it if that's not it? generally this is how we do it. Sheet metal and fire caulk and things like that. I mean, it's a little bit more involved than just, messing around with something else because it's a chimney. So this is the kind of thing that, if you're really handy and you want to go for it, you could probably, handle it, but might be the kind of thing you would want to, get some professional help on. A lot of times you have open wall tops, especially in older homes, like balloon framed homes where there's no top plate. So that's a big wall going down. Again, be careful you don't drop the phone because it's going down in that wall. And don't let your cat up in the attic because the cat can fall down there. So these are obviously any air that gets into this wall through electrical sockets and light switches and stuff, it's just going right up into the attic and out. So that's important to make sure that those all get sealed up. And even if you don't have balloon framing, even if you have a house that's new, there's air going out. And the reason I know, one of the reasons I know, is because I go up into attics and I do things like this and pull up the fiberglass, and there's the top plate of the wall, and there's a big black line that lines up perfectly with that line. It's because no 2x4 is exactly 3.5 inches wide. They're all a little bit different, and they dry and they shrink and twist, and then when sheetrockers come in, they put the sheetrock in. So there's always a gap between the sheetrock and the 2x4s, so that can collect the air from the house and send it right up into the attic. So it leaves behind this telltale sign. Here you can see here where it's pressed here, and then it's there, boom. This is a big wide one here, really nasty black stuff, but clean where it was up against the 2x4. And there's a bath fan, and you can see how this was laid down on top of that when I pulled it up. I mean, you can see the 3 holes in the top of the, So we have some really fancy equipment that we use in audits, but a lot of times we're just up in the attic looking around at stuff like this. It's a little bit more of a low-tech way of finding it. This is a house I was just in 2 weeks ago, and when I noticed when I walked in, they had this beautiful grand staircase going upstairs with a big curved wall. And as an energy auditor, I'm like, oh, there's a red flag right there, I'll bet you, And sure enough, I go up in the attic. I'm like, oh, glad I didn't step there because I would be down inside that cavity. It's 10 feet down. And there's the back of the curved wall going up their staircase. And that's just sheetrock right there, right? So there was a little bit of insulation thrown over this hole, but the insulation, as we saw, is not stopping the airflow, and it's certainly not doing a good job of keeping the heat in. So
how would you fix that? Would you blow it in, or?
Well, a couple of things you could do. Well, you could go down in there and then insulate the back of this whole wall, and then do this wall better and this wall better. But that's a big, huge surface area, so it probably would be better to just do the triangle at the top. So we would seal that up completely, so no air can come out of it, and then insulate it up to R50. And then when Johnny's going up the stairs and he's mad at Dad and he punches his fist through the wall, Dad doesn't have to worry about fixing the hole in the sheetrock real fast because all the heat in the house is going up, because it's really not going to go up anymore, because if there was a hole in that sheetrock, who cares, as long as the top is sealed. And that's a good question. If you have, a lot of people have blown fiberglass in their attic. If you have blown fiberglass, it's pretty much the same thing. I see the same thing, right? There's a hole where the vent pipe for the bathroom was cut, and this white, beautiful white fluffy is not so white and fluffy anymore. It's black and nasty, and it's just dirt, dust, pollen, things like that. And then there's the 2x4. That's the wall, the top of the wall, and there's the crack on either side. So this is might be a hallway over here, and this is a bedroom, and that's the wall in between them. And sure enough, you see the black here, same thing here. Question?
Just because I see it going in all this old, is there any reason, does insulation lose its R value over time? We have a house that's built in 1975 during the energy crisis, so it's got tons of insulation, but I see a lot of this.
It will not only what's more important is not whether it loses insulation value over time, but what it's doing right now. Remember I showed you the picture of the thermal barrier with the insulation layer and the air barrier. To me, one good way of looking at it is like a big, a lot of people love these big puffy down jackets, right? You go for a walk on a nice still day, you're like, I'm so happy with this jacket. There's a lot of money, but it keeps me warm. And all of a sudden, the next day you go out and it's windy. You're like, oh, this jacket sucks now. The wind is cutting right through it. It's making you cold. Same insulation. It's the same thickness, but now it doesn't work so well. So insulation doesn't work if it has air going through it. So how do you solve that problem? You put a windbreaker on. I mean, what's a windbreaker? Wind is air, and break means stop. So windbreaker, stop, air. I mean, that's what a windbreaker does. If you put it on top of a sweater or a down jacket, it stops the air from going through the insulation so that it can work well. So if you have a bunch of insulation and you've got air going through it, it's not really working as well as it could. So that's the more important thing. But I mean, it can do weird things to it over time too, but the more important thing is like, what's it doing now, right? So like this insulation right here is not really doing much if it's got air going through it.
So to fix that, the picture that you had on the left, would you seal?
Yeah, seal around it, yeah. We have some pictures coming up that'll show a little bit more of that. If you have this, if this looks familiar, please leave it alone. This is vermiculite. So if you go up in your attic or somewhere and you're shoveling around, you see this kind of thing, it may or may not have asbestos in it. So you don't want to be disturbing it. That's the last thing you want to do. So that's definitely when it's time to get some professional help in. It was put in the 20s and 30s, I think it was, maybe up even in the 40s. But I've been in houses that were built in 1974, and they have this in there. Don't ask me why or how. I mean, I guess someone just found some around. It said, oh, it's insulation, so we'll just dump it in the attic. Or they bought it at a garage sale or something, or it was in the back of the shed when they bought the house. I mean, so there's another picture of it just in case, because I want to make sure everyone kind of knows what it is. It looks like flaky, because a lot of homeowners think that they're like, oh yeah, I have cellulose in my attic, and I come down, I'm like, no, you don't, you have vermiculite, So there's a lot of sort of, because when you buy a house, you don't get an owner's manual like when you get a car, It's the biggest thing we buy in our whole entire life, and you don't get anything. You get a set of keys. They're like, here, figure it out. You don't know how to, no one knows how to do it. So I just took this last week in someone's house. I went up to the soffit and pulled the soffit down and stuck my camera up there and took a picture, and didn't know that. Homeowner didn't know it either. Actually, he doesn't know it. He doesn't even know it now yet because I haven't given him his report yet, but he'll find out in a couple days. I hate being the bearer of bad news, but yeah, so don't touch the stuff if you see it. Yeah, so that's what we're just talking about there. Like there's a bypass where air can get up into the attic, plumbing and electrical stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that you want to seal up if you're going to take it on yourself. There's a couple different, this is like new construction almost, right? But you can kind of get the idea. This is an open wall top, like a balloon frame wall, with some rigid, like a piece of rigid foam board put in there and foamed into place. So those are some simple things that you can do. I would definitely be careful, all right? Use gloves, wear goggles, because the stuff does squirt around sometimes and it does drip. Wear a mask if you're up in the attic. If you find a gun, like I did at this time, don't play with it, like I did. I went to the homeowner afterwards. She had just bought this old house. And I said, I have kind of a weird question for you. Like, do you have any firearms in the house? I know it's not energy related, but she's like, no, why? I'm like, well, what would you say if I told you actually do? She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, come here and look at this. Look what I found in your knee wall space up behind the closet in the bathroom, There was like the woman that owned the place was like a hoarder, so there was like a box of checks from the 60s and then some costume jewelry, and then there was a box with this in it. And I thought it was kind of funny. I took a picture of it. I texted it to like one of my colleagues, like, hey, look what I found, And then she told me that, she's like, yeah, when I bought the place, I was taking all this old lady's stuff that she hoarded to the dump, and the guys in the dump were telling me, like, oh, you bought the old Jones place up on the hill. Like, oh, the rumor has it there's a gun hidden in that house somewhere. I'm like, well, I guess we found it, And then I was like, well, what was that used for? I'm like, I was a teacher for 20 years. That means my fingerprints are on file, and I just touched it. Like, oh, what do I get myself into? Like, what if it was used in a murder or something, And this down here, of course, is bat guano. If you see that, you want to leave that alone, too, and get a professional, because that stuff can actually make you sick, too. And a lot of homeowners think they have a mouse problem, and I come down after being in the attic, I'm like, yeah, all those mouse traps you put up there? You wasted your money, because it's not mice, it's bats. It looks kind of the same, but there are ways of telling a difference.
What's the picture on the bottom left?
That's just me with a mask on. I'm just saying you should, if it's going to be dusty and stuff, you wearing a mask is a good idea it's just a dust mask. It's not like a full respirator or anything, Yeah. Yeah, we can do a short break. Yeah. You guys want to take a quick break for, I don't know, bathroom, water break or anything? Or?
5-10 minutes. If you want to use the break room, that's what.
It might be a good time to do that. And if you have some questions, you can ask me. We're still going to go through some more air sealing and talk about the home performance program and an audit and what that involves and some health and safety stuff too. So stick around for that. But yeah, let's take a break for a couple minutes.
You talked about dehumidifiers. I run 2 of them in the summertime.
Yeah.
And mine are all really old. What I'm guessing from what you inferred was that I should get rid of them and get some newer ones.
Yeah.
The newer ones, I assume, are much more efficient.
They are, yes. New ones are much more efficient. You might be able to even have one where you had two old ones before. Sometimes I'm in a basement or crawl space that's so humid that we recommend that you might even want to like jump up to like a heavier duty model, like a commercial grade one. I mean, I hate to recommend that because I'm in the business of trying to save people energy. So, but if you have, you have a really humid basement, there's other things you can do too. Like you can try to keep the water off the foundation and not have, like I had a customer who had a sump pump dumping the water right outside of the foundation and was wondering why it's running all the time. Like it's just recycling the same 2 gallons of water over and over again, People say you can't do gutters in New Hampshire. That's hogwash. You can do gutters in New Hampshire. You just put aside a half hour in the fall to take them down, and then you set aside a half hour in April to put them back up again, like I did. So for 8 or 9 months of the year, you can keep all the water off your deck and from going in your foundation. You can direct it away from your house for 8 or 9 months of the year, as long as you just, I mean, it's a little harder, obviously, if you have a real tall house, but if you got a little ranch, And if you can't do it, you hire the local kid to come over and take them off. It's not that hard to do.
Those refrigerators, there's a lot of studies on old refrigerators, so you'll have to bear with me, but if you have that old air refrigerator in your garage, or somebody gave you a refrigerator, it's worth your while to get rid of it.
Yeah.
If it's more than 10 years old, because you will pay back a brand new refrigerator in 5.8 years. And then it all comes down to size, but the average is 5.8 years. Your refrigerator will pay for itself being brand new.
Yep.
Than keeping that 10-year-old one in your house. It's only for the bear and the cold. We
Yeah.
don't use it that often.
Still running, you're right.
Technology in refrigeration has changed dramatically.
I went to see my dad a couple years ago in New Jersey, and he was, look at this great refrigerator I got. It was out at the curb. Someone was throwing it away. Isn't it nice? I'm like, oh, yeah. I'm like, Dad, look at this thing. Like, you may think you got a great deal, but you kind of just, shot yourself in the foot because this thing's going to it's using more power than the one you replaced. It was a nicer looking thing. No doubt. It was like people took care of it, but it was so old it was using tons of power. So, question?
On dehumidifiers.
Yeah.
Other things. We have a 15-year-old water heater, and been thinking about hybrid water heaters. And I've heard that they can be used as a dehumidifier.
Yeah, you kind of have to have certain things that need to exist for that to work. One is, generally speaking, you want to have a pretty big basement that is pretty cold and damp, unheated, not living space. Like concrete walls, concrete floor, or stone or something. That would be, it could be, because then your dehumidifier is not going to run as much because the hot water heater, at the same time it's making hot water, is also going to dehumidify the air around it.
Do they work well in New England?
Yeah, oh yeah, they work great, yeah. And there's rebates for them and everything too. They're fantastic, but they don't work in everyone's basement, is what I'm saying. Like if you have like a living space down there and stuff, it's probably not going to be a good choice. Or if it's a really tiny space, there's a certain size requirement. But an HVAC person should be able to come in and give you an estimate on that. And
You can actually put a couple of ducts in and return supply to your basement, and that alone will dehumidify. Another one is a simple window air conditioner. Energy Star window air conditioner, put it down there, that will dehumidify. Now the good thing is the heat's going outside of those, whereas on a dehumidifier, the heat stays in your basement and can cause back more moisture problems because now that heat hits that cool wall, and then it humidifies. So you're defeating running a dehumidifier. So there are other ways, there's air circulation methods. There's all kinds of methods for dehumidifying basements.
yeah, but like I said, the lowest hanging fruit is just to get rid of the old one and get a new one in there and try to keep the water away from out of there as much as you can. I'm assuming you're not drying any firewood down there, are you? Because I've seen people try to do that. That's a bad idea. That'll turn your basement into a jungle. Don't vent your dryer into the basement. I've seen that. There's some pictures coming up of that. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do that will intensify the problem. You know what I mean? And make it worse for you. Any other questions? All right, great. Well, let's keep going here. Recessed lights are in a lot of houses. Some people love them, some people hate them. That's the downside over there on the left, what you see when you're in the house, and in the middle there is what it looks like up in the attic. This is one up on the right here that is, it looks clean now because I took all the insulation away from it, but it's a what they call a non-icy can, which means it's not insulation contact rated. It's not supposed to be touching insulation, and it was completely covered in insulation. So,
You change that?
what's that?
Don't these change that?
It's a little bit of a gray area. I'm not quite sure if I know the answer to that, technically speaking.
Because I used a heat sensing.
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely less heat. Yeah. So if you're like worried about it and you can't get the insulation away from your recessed lights, because I've even seen them in like cathedral ceilings and stuff. Yeah, putting an LED in is going to reduce the heat load for sure. So, like in theory, yeah, but sort of legally, technically, it still might, yeah. So this is an area where you might want to get some help from a professional on these, just because it can be a little tricky, sort of like chimneys, Yeah, another reason why you want to keep the hot air in your house is because that warm air is moist. And if that moist air gets into your attic, not only have you lost a bunch of energy, but when it gets up there, it's cold up there in most attics, and then it's going to condense, and you're going to have this. If I see this black stuff, technically I'm not a mold expert, so I can't tell someone you have mold. I could say, you have this black stuff that we should have a mold expert look at, and they may or may not say it needs to be. But the white stuff, like, oh, that's ice. Like, I don't need a license or certificate or take a class to know what ice is. The whole underside of your roof is completely frosted. That's a no-brainer. So,
There's rusty nails.
yeah, or dripping nails. Yeah, rusty or dripping nails, yep. So if you see that kind of stuff too, again, yeah, to me, if it was my house, I might be like, oh, geez, maybe I ought to get somebody, a professional in here. This might be a little bit too much. This is a really good example to show why that's so important, right? So if you had one piece of 4x8 sheetrock and you had a hole in it that was only 1 inch square, you're going to get 30 quarts of water going through that hole in a year into whatever space that is, which is probably going to be your knee walls or your attic. So, 1 inch square, that's a pretty small hole. And it might not be one hole, it might be a crack all the way around that when you add it together it equals one hole like this. So you could be having all this moisture from your house getting in there. Even if your house doesn't feel moist. I mean, there's plenty of houses that it feels fine inside the house, but you go up in the attic and it looks like that, knee walls, capes, knee walls are almost always a problem. One of the main problems is that this is not sealed here. So there's some insulation up here and there's some down here. Not enough, but there's some, but this is not sealed here. So all the recessed lights in the kitchen here and all these walls, like where there's electric sockets and there's light switches and all these interior walls, all the air gets into those walls, it goes up to the top because when the electrician runs the wires over, they're cutting holes in the tops of all the 2x4s. So once the air gets into this space, it can just freely travel out here, and then it's up through the air chutes and out. This is an interesting one. So this is a house in Portsmouth where it was a cape, and they built a dormer on the backside, and there were soffit vents all the way along here. And the people said that their floors were really, really cold, so I'm going to check this out a little bit, and their bills were sky high. And I pulled the soffit venting down here, right about there, and reached up and took a picture, and I could look all the way across the other side of the house. So basically, they cold air underneath the whole entire floor of their whole entire house, because when they put this dormer up, they should have sealed up these soffit vents, because they're not going anywhere anymore. They're not going to an attic, they're just going right into the wall. See that actually quite a bit. This is a condo in Dover that we just finished working on. Some of the units were fine, but some of the units were horrible, and when we pulled down the vinyl siding that they had on this little overhang, we found that it was just yellow fiberglass insulation. So when they built this wall, the crew was like, oh yeah, we're going to put wood sheathing up, and then we're going to wrap it with Tyvek, and then we're going to put the vinyl siding. And then for some reason, when they got to the overhang, they're like, oh, we could skip that silly wood and Tyvek. We don't need to do that, and we'll just put vinyl siding up there. And then when they started doing the second story, they went back to doing wood. And I mean, I don't understand it, but why you wouldn't treat that the same as the wall. But I could reach it through there and knock on the sheetrock in there's a hallway. This is actually over the garage. They had a frozen pipe right inside here, sure enough, because air was getting sucked into the house through here. So these are the kind of and this is a house, this was 16 years old, and there were 40 of them like this. So.
Job security?
Yeah. I won't explain that one. So we'll go to basements. The things that leak in the basement, generally speaking, are, if you have a door going out to a big bulkhead, that's leaky usually. You do have a bunch of penetrations. You got the rim joists. We'll show a picture of that. Old windows. So here's a door, treatment on a door with rigid foam and, some new weather stripping and that kind of thing. Putting an exterior door on where it needs one, if it's just a, old piece of junk interior door. This is an old doorway going up to a bulkhead, Makes it easy to get your wood in and out, I guess, if you're doing that, but it also makes it really easy for air to come in to the house, right? So when you're done with it, that's kind of what it looked like. Just put a wood frame in there, insulated it, boom, boom, boom. So now that thing's totally sealed up. So imagine how much air is going through there versus there, And people, it's only the basement. Well, the basement is attached to the living space, and the living space is attached to the attic. It's all connected, So if you go down in the basement, a lot of times you'll look up and you'll see something up here. It's called, box sill or rim joist, something like that. That's an area where there's a lot of heat loss. A lot of times you'll look up and see something like this, or maybe you've even done this yourself. You don't have to admit it if you have, but if you did, it wasn't a really good idea. A little square of fiberglass up there is not going to do much, because as we saw, fiberglass doesn't stop the airflow. It's also not insulating very well either if it's got all these big holes in it. So, and a better way to do it would be to cut some squares of rigid foam and foam it in there. This is a little bit more of a professional way of doing it with spray foam. It's New Hampshire, it's live free or die. It depends on what town you're in. Who's the building inspector? Do they have a building inspector? What year of the building code are they following? Do they know anything? So like as a contractor, we could never do this because it wouldn't meet the fire code. But if you're a homeowner, I can't tell you what to do or not to do. All I'm saying is I don't think anyone's going to come in. There is no yearly inspection to see if you've met the fire code. Here's a pipe and a cable going through the hole, and sure enough, look at the fiberglass. It's all dark and stained. Well, what do you know? There's air coming through there, obviously. So you can kind of do the detective work yourself. This is interesting too. This is like a double layer of like 2x10s. And there's a crack, a vertical crack, but sure enough, air can still find its way all the way through there, and you can tell because there's a black line there. When I first looked at that, I'm like, oh, that seems like such a hoot. But then you look at the fiberglass, like, oh, I guess it is a big deal. The gap between the sill plate and the foundation is an area where there's a lot of air leakage. Whether you have a gasket here or not, the wood shrinks, the foundations settle over time, so those gaps can open up. This is one I saw. This is actually just 2 weeks ago. So there's the sill plates, and there's the concrete wall, and you notice there's like a 1.5 inch gap there. In fact, I think they might have made the gap because they put these shims in there. I think the flooring guy or something wanted to make sure the floor was level, so he pounded shims in there and created this big, huge gap. So how do you do it? You put on a really nice sweater like this, and you go down in the basement, and you go to work foaming it up, wearing gloves and with your nice sweater. This is more of a professional approach to spray foaming. This was actually, can anyone guess what's behind there? A window, yeah. Windows in basements, well, what do you need them for? There's not much of a reason to have a window in a basement these days. You don't admire the view out the window. You're not using it for light in most cases. No one ever says, I'm going to leave the lights off and just use the light coming through the window in the basement, So if it's not being used for light, you're not admiring the view, you're not opening it for ventilation, because if you did that in the summer, that's kind of silly. You're letting in warm air into your basement, warm, humid air, that doesn't make any sense. And what was the other reason? Oh, fire escape. If there's not a bedroom down there, you don't need a fire escape, so, fire egress. So a lot of new high-performance houses won't have windows at all because it's extra money. Why spend extra money on something you don't need? So a lot of times we'll just spray foam right over them. We paint them black first and then spray foam right over them. Kind of tying it all together, we talked a little bit about airflow and insulation, and so the attic is the most important thing. The attic insulation only works well when there's no air going through it, just like the down jacket. We were talking about that. So, if you're thinking about insulating your attic, you should air seal it first. R50 to R60 is really what we shoot for, and the energy code is, again, it's New Hampshire. It depends on what town you're in. I was in a house recently. The paint wasn't even dry yet. The builder wasn't even done putting in some of the lights and stuff, and I went up in the attic. I was there to actually give her a price quote on putting insulation between the basement and the first floor for sound. And I'm like, well, I'm here. I might as well look at your attic, So I went and looked at her attic, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to tell you this and then leave really quick because I don't want to get in trouble with your builder, but like, you don't even have R30 in half of your attic, let alone 38. And I don't know what, I'm not sure what year of the building code your town is using, but you should have a talk with your builder because, I mean, they didn't even have R30. This is an interesting study. A lot of people say, oh, the hatch, how big of that deal can it be? It's just a little tiny little hatch, And they actually did a study where they said if you had a whole attic and only 1% of that attic was not insulated at all, like a hatch, just a piece of wood or something, then the whole assembly R value, which is kind of a rating for the whole thing, will drop actually down by 25%. So it is really important to make sure that like every little square inch of your attic is insulated. You don't want to leave a 2 foot by 2 foot area and say, oh, it's just not that big, so it shouldn't really be a big deal. Basements, this is an option, is to do some insulating and air sealing on the walls, rigid foam, spray foam. That gets really complicated, and there's ways of messing it up and stuff. So, again, I would recommend you get some professional help for that one. Center of the house, usually there's not a whole lot you can do unless the wall cavities are empty already, which there are plenty of people who are living in houses that have empty wall cavities. So you can insulate those. Usually that's done from the outside, not always, but usually. Take off some siding and fill up the cavities. With cellulose here, this is a rigid foam going on in the house, so there's some options there for the center. If you're looking around for places to air seal inside your house, again, the best way to air seal is up in the attic and in the basement, but sometimes there's some stuff you can do in the house. Like if you have recessed lights like this and you see that little line of black dust right there, that's a telltale sign that air has been going through there because the dust has been getting trapped. Like once one piece of dust gets trapped, another piece like latches onto it, it sort of builds up. So that's kind of how you can tell if you have a leaky recessed light, as long as it's old. You have a drop ceiling, you pull it down, you look, and you saw the electrician was really high skilled and decided he was going to use his fist to run the wire through the wall. That would be a good place to seal up. Fireplaces have lots of different options, from sealing it up to these fancy things on the top and then chimney balloons and things like that. Windows. Usually people are asking about windows. You can tell how I feel about windows. They're very expensive. They don't save a whole lot of energy. They're always going to be the weak point no matter what. If it's clear and you can see through it, even if you spent $900 on the triple pane argon-filled window from Sweden or something, it's still, it can only be so good. And for that same amount of money, in most people's houses, you could make a much bigger part of your house much better than just that little 2 foot by 3 foot area. You can also buy brand new windows, put them in. If they're not put in right, they can leak worse than the ones that you replaced. I've seen that too. And as you already learned, you can keep the air from coming in around an old window by going up in your attic. Because if you do a bunch of work in the attic to keep the air from coming in, you can kind of get away with having old windows that are a little bit leaky. And the gap might still be there, but air is not going to come in if it can't push any air out to make space for it. The other reason is that there are other options, that are cheaper and work pretty much just as well. I just took this picture last week in Keene. This is a really nice interior storm that this lady had done. I don't remember the name of the company. So it's a fraction of the price of a new window, but now she basically has like a double pane window. The same thing. And since it's an interior storm, it's going to last a long time because it's not outside getting the wet, hitting the weather. So a lot of times people think that they're like, oh, my windows are from 1790 or something. And I'm like, no, you got a storm on the outside. They look like they're in pretty good shape. They're not cracked. They open and shut. Leave them. Let's insulate your attic because you only have this much up there. Yeah. Yeah, the plastic is basically the same exact thing as doing this, right? You put it over there, you do it, And some people love that. Some people hate it because but it basically does the same thing. It's creating an airspace so it insulates. It keeps air from coming in. So it can do the same thing. Yeah, it's a really inexpensive alternative. These are about $10 a square foot about, I think is what she paid, she said. Because they're all custom made too. Somebody has to come out and measure each window. Maybe it would be less if they were all standard sizes. Yeah, and there's that same picture again. So just kind of keep thinking of that in your mind when you're thinking about these things. You should be able to draw a line all the way around your house and get back to where you started and never, ever take your pen off the paper if you're tracing your insulation barrier and your air barrier, you know? And if you have to take your pencil off the paper at any point, then that's a problem, right? Heating systems, everyone's got them. Some of them work well, some of them don't. You know, make sure you get them serviced, replace the filters, make sure that the ducts are connected to the registers. I mean, these are real pictures from people's houses where it's like, that room is cold. I'm like, well, I think I know why, because the thing isn't even connected. You know, how long has it been like that? Oh, years. Well, that's a no-brainer, you know. This is an attic in Portsmouth, and the people had told me, they just bought the place, and they're like, geez, the second floor, they had two ACs. This is the second floor one. They're like, that thing never shuts down, and the second floor still is super hot all the time. I don't know what's going on. The first floor one works fine, but, and I went up in the attic, and like, this is the return for the air conditioning system. There was two of these. It's a big metal uninsulated duct, and it's running along the ceiling, the hottest part of the attic, trying to get back there. So it's taking air from the room that's like 75 degrees, and it's trying to get it over to the air conditioner to cool it off. And by the time the air gets over to the air conditioner, like it's picked up heat, not lost heat, because it's, you know. So I think the original owners were going to maybe make this into a living space or something. I don't know why they would run all that stuff up there. So we told them, like, well, geez, if you don't need the storage up there, then, you know, we had a company come in and move all the ducts to the floor. And then we came in and blew like a foot of cellulose, and we covered over all the ducts and insulated them at the same time. So that's when it works out well. Dryers, that's my hand, that's my dryer. I moved into my house. I was renting a house. It was a couple. They had only lived there for 3 or 4 years. The house was only 3 or 4 years old, too. And I opened it up, and I couldn't believe how much lint was in there. I'm like, I have 2 kids. We're doing a lot of washing. Like, if they made that much lint in 3 or 4 years by themselves, just this couple, you know, cleaned all that out. You know, a lot of times people have big openings and stuff. So, you know, you want to use rigid, smooth metal pipe for that. There are a lot of dryer fires in America. I don't know what the statistic is. I can't remember. I used to have a slide in here on it. It's more than you would think. Not that they're all, you know, attributed to this, but they can be. Yeah, don't take your Winnie the Pooh or whatever it is sheet or pillowcase and put it over your. And that was their lint filter on their dryer. It was going into the basement. Yeah, I was like, okay, that's not a good idea. You know, carbon monoxide is a huge issue. Anytime you have combustion, you have carbon monoxide. And in the best case scenario, it's getting out of the house the way it's supposed to be. But there are lots of times where it doesn't get out of the house, especially if you're going to make changes to the house and do things. So, you know, this is a good time to get a home performance professional to come in. And, you know, because when we come in, we do heating system safety checks, which I think are actually even better than the ones that the HVAC guys do, because we do it in real-world conditions. In other words, we turn on the dryer, the bath fan, and the kitchen fan, all the stuff that might affect this, and then we test it, whereas a lot of the HVAC guys don't do that. That's a whole other story. But anyway, carbon monoxide, again, you know, and you guys have probably read. Yeah?
You should also let them know, carbon monoxide detectors, max is 9 years life.
Yeah.
So if you have a 20-year-old home and have to replace your
Yeah.
combination or even your smoke detectors,
Yep.
they're only rated for 9 years max. There are ones now that replace some of the ones for the newer homes in town here that the bills have put in, that you can take your standard smoke detector and you can, like Kitty, who makes like 4 different brands,
Yeah.
and then you can get combinations for them, and it will set off the alarm of the whole house.
Yeah.
Highly recommend that you do one.
Yep. I mean, these are pulled. This was pulled out of the news in 2013. This one was actually 2016 in May, right? And I mean, I see a lot of situations where I'm like, thank God, this could have gotten really bad. You know, whether it's snow coming off of a roof and piling up behind a house and covering up a vent, or people piling stuff up against a furnace down in the basement, or there's all sorts of crazy things. And a lot of times it's things that you necessarily wouldn't even know that are happening or that you're not aware of. So, this is a house in Kentucky that I was in 2 weeks ago. And when I walked down the basement stairs, that's the bottom stair, and I went to take a turn, I was like, whoa, don't step on that. That's the oil line. And I looked at it, it was already like crimped and crushed a little bit. I'm like, if that thing breaks, like you're going to be moving out of your house for months while the hazmat people come in to clean this place up. Like that's going to be a disaster for you. It's a little tiny copper pipe this thick. It's going right across the floor. unprotected, unsecured. If somebody trips on it, they could just yank it.
But you can get your beer.
Yeah. And then I went over to the furnace, and there's the hang tag. Oh, they were just here, a couple months ago. They checked it out, and I look, and there's the temperature and pressure relief valve, which she's like, oh yeah, that went off a couple years ago. And I'm like, it's pointing this way. So the purpose of that is to, if there's too much pressure, it'll blow, and it'll blow off really scalding hot water. And by code, it's supposed to have a copper pipe coming down to the floor so that it doesn't hit you or anybody else that happens to be standing there. In this case, it was shooting off to the side, so I'm like, hopefully no one's going to stand here. And then they had a musical studio down there with like a big, huge stand-up bass and keyboards and drums. I mean, it was like thousands and thousands of dollars of musical equipment sitting right there. I'm like, kiss that stuff goodbye if that thing goes again. And this had just been checked out by somebody. Bath fans, don't do this. Don't put 3 of them together in the attic. That's not a good idea. Don't just have it come straight up like this and stop and vent it right into the attic. That's a bad idea. Here's one that just popped off. Make sure it's on. Here's one that never even got an exhaust pipe put on. And here's one that has an exhaust pipe, and it's trying to blow warm, humid air down out the soffit when the laws of physics say that the dry, cold air is going to be coming in there. So you're trying to go against the traffic, and not really going to happen. So that's not a good idea either. I mean, sometimes you can't avoid it. You have to go through the soffit, but it should go all the way out through the soffit, not just into that little cavity. If you have a water problem in your basement, which many people do, you need to get that taken care of first before you take on some of this air sealing, whether it's something you do yourself or whether it's something you have a professional come in and do. It's okay to have some water in your basement as long as you have a dehumidifier and you have a sump pump that works and gets rid of it or whatever. But like these people had, actually, yeah, they had like 4 inches of water in one corner, but the sump pump was in that corner. It's like the high spot was, so they had to get concrete put in to sort of re-level the floor to get the water to go to the sump pump. But I mean, that's why you have 200 or 300-year-old houses that are still here and they're beautiful shape, even though there's a spring in the basement or a river. Like they're not rotting out because all the moisture has a place to go. It goes in the house and out, and who cares? But now someone moves in and they don't want to spend $8,000 a year on oil, so they try to insulate it and seal up the walls and insulate it. Well, now where's that moisture going to go? Like that's not a callback that we want to get in 2 years. Like, hey, my house is rotting away, or I'm getting sick. So you got to take care of the water problems first. This is kind of a typical way that that professionals would take care of. Like this is a dirt floor crawl space, right? So there's moisture coming up through the dirt. So we lay down like a polyplastic layer and then spray foam it to the walls. Again, you know your house, like know if you have vermiculite, knob and tube wiring. Almost everyone that I find who has knob and tube wiring don't know that they have it, or they think it's dead, and then we find out that it's still alive. They're like, oh, I couldn't even get a mortgage unless I had a new circuit breaker put in the basement. You go down there, you'll see it. It's all cut off. You'll see there's nothing there. And I'm like, yeah, I was down there. I saw it. I'm like, I'm not an electrician, but I got this little $5 thing from Lowe's, and I hold it up to the ceiling in their bedroom, and it's going beep, 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 and their jaw drops. I'm like, what does that mean? I'm like, I'm not an electrician, but I was just up there, and the only thing I saw was knob and tube. So this thing is telling me that knob and tube is still active. How is that possible? Well, there's little pieces here and there, and somewhere back in the day, someone had to run a socket or a light switch, so they just tied into pieces. So even though it might look like it's dead from the basement, if you have it somewhere else, it still could be live. I've had customers that basically we have a form that they have to get an electrician to come in and sign saying, I certify that I took it out, or I certify that I tested it and it's dead. And sometimes when they get the electrician over there to sign the form, they call me up and they're saying, oh, geez, we can't really do the project yet because the guy can't sign the form because he told me that the knob and tube in the attic that I thought was dead for the last 20 years is actually still alive. It's buried in the insulation and everything. Shouldn't be. So, here's moisture problems. Here's a lolly column. It's like all rusted out. And indoor air pollutants are a big issue that we're still, building science is still sort of, it's an evolving field as houses get tighter and tighter because people are concerned about their energy bills. Indoor air pollutants become more of an issue. whether it's cooking odors or off-gassing of all the products that you buy, you bring in your house, even if you can't smell them, they're off-gassing, right? You have moisture, you could have carbon monoxide, lots of different things. So, the best thing is to have a plan for controlling those things. Kitchen fans, bath fans, things like that. A lot of people have trouble with humidity in their houses. The best way to do it is to get one of these cheap devices here that will measure the humidity. And you can get like 3 or 4 different sensors. So you can say, this room is this, the basement's this, the attic is this, and you can kind of keep an eye on it. A lot of times houses are not at the ideal humidity level it's hard to kind of balance for all the variables. If you look down here, this is like, bacteria, viruses, fungus, mites, respiratory things, somewhere in here in the middle between 30 and 55 is where you want to shoot for. If you start going out of that, you start getting into like a danger zone for something or another. You know what I mean? It's really hard to kind of get it right, but that's the safest way to do it there is in there. In the wintertime, you might have to drop it a little bit more to keep the condensation from happening on your windows. That's a big issue. You guys overwhelmed yet? Somebody looks almost just like that yet. So if you want to, if you're at the point where you think you want to work with a professional home performance contractor, I highly recommend it. We kind of come in and look at the whole house as a system. We don't just come in and say, oh yeah, your attic needs this or what. Like we want to know how is the attic tied into the crawl space and the walls, that kind of thing. We test all the heating equipment. Look real hard at everything. Some of the tools we might use. We're in all sorts of different houses. This, believe it or not, is one of the worst houses I've ever been in. I thought I was at the wrong address. I'm going up the road. It's a mile-long driveway going up the side of a mountain. Hairpin turns. And I'm like, Tori must have given me the wrong address for this energy audit. This can't be right. And I get to the top, and that's Lake Winnipesaukee back there. I can see the whole entire lake from end to end. 6,000 square foot house. I looked it up on Zillow real quick. It was $5.5 million. When I walked in, they had a Steinway piano, but it was covered up with a tarp because the sheetrock was falling in from the ice dams that were so bad. That was the right house. It was just a major design flaw in how they built the house. It was a beautiful house, but it was a major design flaw. And it was actually the same thing that was wrong with this little house here. Little modest, ranch. So we're in all different types of houses. This is one of the things that you'll probably see if you get an audit is a blower door. And it's a big fan that goes in the doorway. We kind of use it to measure how leaky the house is. We said that if air's coming in and air's going out, that's a problem. Well, how big of a problem is it? The blower door can tell you that. You can also use the blower door to figure out where are the big things that are leaking, where aren't they? Sometimes things you think are going to leak aren't, and things that you're kind of surprised, well, I didn't think that was going to leak. We also use infrared cameras a lot to find voids in insulation and air leaks and things like that. Sometimes they're not really that helpful, honestly, but a lot of times they are. So it's again, it's just one of the tools that we use, and you can see some really cool stuff. This is a little bump out in this house, and why is that so cold there? And that's warm. They forgot to insulate that part. I've been in houses that are only 2 years old. I was in a house in Nashville that was 2 years old, had no insulation in the attic. Horror story. I don't know how that happened, but they didn't have an attic hatch, so that was part of the way it happened. So you can find a lot of hidden things like this that you wouldn't necessarily know otherwise. BPI.org is a great place to go if you want to get some more information. REPA is a local organization. You can get a list of people who can do audits for you. If you get an audit, you should be getting a written report. It should have, you could do this, this, and this. It'll cost you this. It'll save you this. Usually they're around $300 to $600 for a typical house. That's that's a range. But if you do get professional work done, this is the kind of stuff that you might get done in your house. That this is pretty hard to do yourself. This is spray foam in a knee wall space and in a basement and blowing cellulose and everything. Most of this stuff is a little bit beyond what the average homeowner wants to do. Awesome program, New Hampshire Saves. Part of the reason why I'm here tonight. You can qualify by going to their website, and if you basically put in your square footage and your heating bills, and you put the two together, and it'll tell you yeah, your house needs some work, you might qualify, or yeah, your house is good enough. You don't qualify. If you do, then you get an audit for $100, which is a deal right off the bat. And then once you get the audit report, let's say there's 5 things on there. If you do all 5, they'll pay for half of the work, up to $4,000. So let's say you want to do $8,000 of work, the utility would pay for 4 of it, you only have to pay 4.
And the $100 is out of the,
Yeah, and then $100 comes off that too, yeah, you get that back. And a lot of times I'll put LEDs in while I'm doing the audit, so even if you don't do the work, you get to keep the LEDs for free. Yeah.
What if you're also heating wood, so?
There's a place you can put in, like, I think you can put in 2 or maybe even 3 fuel sources. Yeah, you can put in 2. And if you have more, then they'll let you could call up and they figure out a way to do it. Because you can transfer like wood pellets to wood or wood to oil. So it's an awesome program. Unfortunately, most people don't know about it. Do you guys know about mass saves? And I hear ads on the radio all the time for mass saves, like in New Hampshire. Like everyone knows about mass. It's the same thing in Massachusetts, but in New Hampshire, the marketing budget for this program is not very big. So a lot of people don't know about it. It's a shame because it's not like a loan. I mean, it's yeah, what's not to like? This is sort of a sample of a report that you would get, right? So here's the proposed improvements, like insulating the pipes, doing the attic. Let's just take one, for instance, the attic here. So it's $2,831 worth of work in the attic, but the utility is going to pay for $1,415 of it, and then the customer is only going to pay $1,450. And if you spend that $1,450, then the payback is 4.5 years for that, and it's going to save you $312.52. Not 55, but 52 cents. Drives me a little bit crazy. I wish they would not go down to the penny with these things because we all know that we're not that good. We're not that accurate, and nonetheless, it is the way it is. It is, generally speaking, very accurate. So yeah, down here is the total cost. So this person's house, the project was $9,800. Utility kicked in $4,000, and they kicked in a little bit more. If it was more like a $7,000 project, usually the utilities actually ends up kicking in even more than the homeowner does. And you also have this to sort of, to digest the information. Like, okay, well, here's how do I decide? Well, the attic is going to cost me this much. It's going to save me this many gallons of oil. So the payback is this many years, and the savings is here. This is interesting. This must be old, because look at that. I think 322. Yeah. So it all depends on the price of oil and gas too, and propane. So that can change. So you add all these up, and it says down here, like, okay, so this package of improvements is going to save you. This is a really big project on a really needy house. $1,900 in energy bills in 1 year, and pay for itself in 2.5 years. So, pretty awesome stuff. Real quickly, these are kind of the wave of the future with heating systems, air source heat pumps. They're roughly 2 to 3 times more efficient than anything else that's out there. There's no ducts at all to run. There's rebates available. You also get AC out of them in the summertime. If you wanted to, you could go the extra mile and put PV somewhere on your roof or in your yard, and that would help offset the electricity cost for this because it does run on electricity. You have on-demand water heaters, especially for people who have like a low energy use. Like you were saying, thinking about a hybrid water heater. How many people in your family? Do you have a 3? So yeah, so like if it's one person living in a house, putting in a big hybrid water heater in the basement, even if they have the perfect basement, might not be such a great idea because they're not using enough water for the thing to run very much. So it's not going to dehumidify very much. But if you had a family of 5 with 3 kids and you're taking showers every day, you're using it, then that makes it more likely that would make sense for you.
We do take showers every day.
You do? Okay, good. Well, that's good. You can take a longer shower and not feel guilty about it, right? Won't say too much about renewable energy production. It's awesome stuff. I mean, I had solar in my own house, right? But the quote is the best way of looking at it to me. Like, the greenest energy you could possibly have is the energy you don't use, So people, I have people who brag, oh, I don't have any electric bills. I have PV in my house. Like, yeah, it costs you $25,000 and you still burn 1,000 gallons of oil a year. So don't talk to me about being green. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying PV is bad. I love PV. I push it all the time. But if you're in a house that's old and leaky and uninsulated and you put PV on your roof, you're kind of putting PV is solar electricity, right? So if you put something like this on your roof or something that you saw here, and you have no electric bill, but you still have to heat your house if you're heating with oil, and you have no insulation in your attic and it's leaking like a sieve, it's sort of putting the cart before the horse, you know what I mean? So generally speaking, and most solar companies that I work with that are reputable companies, If they go into a house that's super leaky and uninsulated, and the people want like a real expensive PV system, they'll be like, all right, well, we're going to give you a quote for it, but we also want you to go over here and get an energy audit first. You know, like, let's get a new refrigerator. Let's put in LED lights. Let's do all that other stuff to get the electric demand down first, because otherwise you're going to put in a system that's way too big. And I've seen houses where that's the case, where like there's a PV system, but they haven't even done anything to reduce the electric demand, so they kind of overspent on the system, you know? And they have a really leaky attic, so that's kind of a little bit of a red flag. Like if you get a solar company that isn't talking to you about that kind of stuff, you know? So, you know, why does this have ice dams?
Insulation.
What's happening to the house? Where's
Air leaking.
air leaking, hot, warm air is leaking, and also heat, right? So heat's going up through the attic, and also hot air, probably both. You can actually see how the ribs of the framing is sticking out here, right? And so it melts, it comes down, and it refreezes on the edge. We run into this all the time. We never promise anybody like that we're going to get rid of your ice dams, because there are some other things that kind of contribute to ice dams. You know, like the pitch of the roof and the color and that kind of thing. But 9 times out of 10 in a house, it's because heat's getting where it's not supposed to get to. So if we come in and do a bunch of work to keep the heat in, this problem is going to be dramatically improved. I had a customer recently that told me that they had a gutter company come in and they said, we'll solve your ice dam problem if we put gutters in. I'm like, really? That's... Let me think about that for a minute. I mean, first of all, it's crazy to promise anything like that, you know what I mean? And then like a month later, somebody said that someone promised them if they got rid of their gutters, they would get rid of their ice dams. I'm like, well, which is it? You know? Short answer is that, you know, gutters might have something to do with an ice dam problem, but you can't solve or create an ice dam problem just with gutters or without gutters. So we all know what the solution is, right? Go out and buy your roof melt tablets, because it's a safe and easy way to get rid of the damaging ice dams on your roof, right? I don't know about you, but going up on a 15-foot ladder in the wintertime with a 50-pound thing of salt on my shoulder and then walking along the roof and putting it out on there does not sound safe to me. People get hurt every year trying to do that. And what happens at the next snow? They're doing it again. Because you didn't solve the problem, right? You just kind of put a Band-Aid on it and got rid of the ice dam, but it's going to come back. You know? So I kind of chuckle when I see these kinds of things. I mean, I know some people are desperate sometimes and they need to get rid of the ice dam because it's backing up into the house or it's coming down the wall and stuff like. So there is a time and a place for this kind of thing, but you know, it's deluding yourself to think that this is the solution. So now you know this stuff. You know, when you're driving around this winter, you'll probably be looking at houses like this, you know, and you'll be like, well, I wonder why that roof has got snow on it, but this one doesn't, you know, and what are those lines? And, well, this funky house here, there's like 3 different shades. So there's like dark at the top and white in the middle and kind of gray at the bottom. What's going on there? You know, and look at this ice dam here, you know. You guys can diagnose this stuff yourself a little bit now.
But you want the one with the snow on it, right?
What's that?
You want your roof to be the one with the snow.
Yeah, generally speaking, yeah. I mean, because the roof should be cold. A lot of times I go to a house sometimes and the homeowner's like, I'm like, what's the biggest problem? And they say, ice dam, over here, come over here. This is where it is, you know? And then I say, well, okay, where's your attic? No, come over here. This is the ice dam. I want you to fix this over here. This is the problem. I'm like, that's not the problem. Like, the roof where your ice dam is cold. That's the way it's supposed to be. There's nothing wrong with that roof. That doesn't need to be fixed. What needs to be fixed is way over here. Like, this is what's melting all the snow and ice up here, and it's coming down. And when it finally gets to a part of the roof that is actually correct, it's a cold roof, it's supposed to be cold, then it refreezes. The problem is that it melted ahead of time, you know? Or I was in a house this winter and I said, what's the biggest problem? And the husband and wife both pointed to this big propane fireplace that was attached on the outside of the house. You know, sometimes they put them out like that. And I was like, well, what's wrong with it? She said, hey, it leaks tons of cold air. It's terrible. And I walked over and they had towels and stuff thrown over it, you know, to keep the cold air out. And I moved the towels and I was like, wow, yeah, you're right. I can feel the cold air. You're right. I feel it. No, okay, where's your attic? No, this. We want you to fix this. I'm like, where's this air going? I'm like, do you have a window open upstairs? I don't think so. It's the middle of January. The air has to be going somewhere. You know, I'm not saying that it might be worthwhile to open up the backside of this and investigate it and do some sealing stuff, but it's probably easier to go up in the attic and figure out why that's happening. So, what else? This I thought was, this is from a couple of years ago. This was on WMUR weather page, I think. Here's a picture of an attic, and it says, a properly vented attic will keep the roof cold and prevent ice dams. Really? Man, I wish it was that easy, Because I'm in plenty of houses that have soft vents and ridge vents, and they still have ice dams. Like, that's completely false and bogus. I mean, the information that's out there is just, I'm not saying that attic ventilation doesn't play a part in ice dams, and it's an important part, but that's not the root cause of it, and it's not going to solve it, right? So that's about it. I forgot, I didn't mention, and Bob left, right? Bob lets me do this, but he makes sure I don't say it during the presentation. But I also do work for one of the approved contractors that is in that NHA's program. So if you're interested in getting an audit, like I said, you can go to the New Hampshire Saves website and you can sign up that way. You can also take a card from one of the companies that I work for here and a brochure, and we can talk and we can hopefully set you up with an audit. They did invite other contractors to come to these things. They usually send out an email to all different contractors. The way that program works is there's a list of approved contractors. So you have to kind of apply to be in the program and abide by all their rules and follow all their things to be in the program. So sometimes they come to these events to talk to customers. Sometimes they don't.
Is there a better time of year to get your audit?
That's a good question. Not really. We do audits all year round. In the summertime, if I'm looking at something, it's the opposite effect. It's heat coming in, so it's kind of a different thermal image. Well, it gets difficult actually when it's like the house is 68 and it's 71 outside. Today would have been a little challenging, but even then, with the blower door running, you can usually still get a good image.
And then the other thing is, insulation has been pushed in everybody's head for years.
Yeah.
But from what I got out of this, it's the ceiling that's probably the bigger issues in homes nowadays.
In most houses, it is, right. Because most houses have some insulation already, So I'm not saying you shouldn't add more, I'm just saying that usually in most houses, it's the leaky factor that's the biggest part. So in reality, it's both, right?
It's bang for your buck.
Yeah, and usually, like I said, you want to do the air sealing first and then put the insulation in. Question? Answer.
Most of the utilities right now are oversubscribed for the HIPAA program. There's a waiting list, so you can't even get into the program yet this year. But if you say, I want to get into next year's program, do it now.
Yeah.
Because this program is heavily subscribed, because it is such a good program for people.
Can you say that again on the microphone so that pick it up for...
That's right, good idea.
I forgot about that aspect of it. It's on. You could just...
Most of the utilities programs right now are fully subscribed, so it's good to apply now for this program and get it in for next year, just so that you can get in under it. It's one of the busiest programs we have in all of this state. It's residential home performance with Energy Star. So get on it. I had it done in my house. I live in town here. I had it done 2 years ago. You can't believe the difference. And I do not have ice dams.
Yeah, great.
But I have good ventilation too.
Seems before.
Yes, small ones in the backside of my house, and I do not have them anymore.
Yeah, great. Last year, actually, the program ran out of funds. After that really horrible winter we had like a couple of years ago, we had like 3 years, was it two winters ago, 3 feet of snow and stuff. Like, I think it was around August or September, they said, we don't even have money to get through the rest of the year for the people who've already been approved. So people have already gotten their projects, like they need to, do the project or not. If they don't, we want to give that money to somebody else, but we don't have enough money for everybody else, so they didn't even make it to the end of the year. So hopefully we'll make it to the end of the year this year, but they're not. Like I said, it depends on your utility too. Like if you're in Liberty Utilities territory or Unitil or EverSource, I think there's only like 3 little pockets in the state, right? It's like Littleton and New Hampton and a couple other ones that have their own little like precinct.
If you're commercial
company.
and you have natural gas or commercial electric, there is still money open for the customers, but not residential programs. So both the electric customers and the gas customers, we do have money for weatherization.
Right.
For commercial customers.
But I do think they have a waiting list though too, so yeah, like don't let that sort of, you know.
Does it
sorry.
renew in January? Will
Renew.
the program renew
Yes, yeah.
in January?
What happens is we're always on a 2-year cycle until 2018. We're on a 2-year cycle with the PUC so that we come up with the savings and the dollars they're going to give us. Starting in 2018, we're going to be on a 3-year cycle, and the money is going to be actually be greater because the state adopted energy efficiency resource standard, which means that they're trying to bring the energy efficiency standards up higher throughout the state. So there'll be more money in 18. I'll tell you that, a lot more money.
Yeah. The other thing I mentioned about the program too, you know, some other things that are great about it in case you're not sold on it yet is that, you know, when you get the report, like that one report I showed you had 8 things on there. Well, you don't have to do all 8. You know, you could just do 4 or 5 of the 8. Or you could do you're not committed to it just because you spent the $100 and got the audit, you know. You can pick and choose and your auditor can, you know, take some things out and change some things. The other thing is that the pricing for it is, interestingly enough, all standard pricing. So, like when I go back, it makes my job a little bit easier because when I go back and type in, okay, you know, like, you know, Joe's house needs 1,000 square feet of cellulose, and I hit enter, boom, it spits out the price. It doesn't matter if it's my company or another company, or if the customer is in Rye or Keene or Concord, it's all the same price for everybody. Which is a little bit different. I think in Mass, you have to go out and get like quotes on it, which you know how that goes. You know, like somebody comes in and says, yeah, I could do that work for $1,000, and someone says, I could do that work for 2, and another person says 4. And you're like, oh, am I getting ripped off if I spend 4,000? Or am I getting ripped off if I only spend 1,000? And what kind of corners is that guy cutting to do it for 1,000? So in Hampshire, they said, let's not put homeowners through that. Anybody who wants to work in the you know, whatever companies want to work in the system have to use that pricing. And a bunch of companies have gotten out of it too because they can't make it work. The utility will come back sometimes and do a QA on the job and make sure that everything was put in right and everything, you know, because they're paying for half of it, right? So if I let's say it's 1,000 square feet of cellulose and you get a bill for half of that, and then I give the other half of the bill to Liberty. Well, like, they want to make sure that we actually put in 1,000 square feet and it was actually 10 inches deep the way we said it was. So, you know, they'll pick one invoice out of every batch and come out to the person's house afterwards and say, hey, we just want to come out and check on it. And, you know, so it keeps all the contractors honest to make sure that we're doing the work that we said we were going to do, and, you know. Yeah, and the homeowners are getting what they're paid for, and, you know, come out and inspect it, make sure everyone's happy. We run the blower door again afterwards. So it's always a little bit of a guess, you know. In other words, like, so I might come into a house, I think I did a house yesterday, and it was like 4,500, which is really high for that size house. And I'm going to estimate, well, I think we can get it down to like 3,500, you know, based on what I saw with the infrared camera and everything. I mean, I don't know exactly for sure if we come in and do all that work, if it's going to go down exactly 1,000. It might be more like 1,200, you know. It could come in even better, but it might only come in at 800 or 900. But it's usually really close, because we're pretty good at doing what we're doing. You know, we've done it enough. So when you come back and run that blower door the second time, you know, and the other reason for running the blower door the second time is to make sure that you're not getting the house. I don't like to use the phrase too tight because to me there really isn't any kind of thing called too tight. But there is a point where you can have to start worrying about indoor air quality if you get the house where there's not enough ventilation. But there's ways of dealing with that. So. But in an existing house, it's really rare to do such a good job that you get it down to that point. But the only way you know is if you run the blower door. So, any other questions? I know I went too long, and I apologize for that, but I think we missed the start of the game. I promised I would get you out by. All right. Like I said, my card's up here if you want to take one. If you have any questions that I can answer for you that I didn't answer, you know, or if anything comes to you, feel free to shoot me an email or call me. And then here's a little brochure about our company and what we do. And then again, if you signed in on the clipboard, I will make sure I get you like an electronic copy of this if you want one. And that's a wrap. Anything else I'm forgetting? Thanks for having me.